On 25 November 1981, armed mercenary forces entered the eastern African country of the Seychelles disguised as a beer-drinking tourist party by the name the Ancient Order of Froth Blowers. Their objective was to return to power the ex-president of the country who had been deposed in a coup in the year 1977. This group of mercenaries was led by a man by the name Mike Hoare, who was a soldier of fortune. At the peak of his career as a mercenary, Mike Hoare was a mainstay of news headlines around the world, and he rose to prominence as a highly sought-after gun for hire in Africa. This was in the era of newly independent Africa, during which mercenaries of different nationalities were recruited by those with interests in the region, particularly in the Congo. Hoare's career as a mercenary came to an embarrassing end in the failed coup d'etat in the Seychelles in November of 1981, during which he was captured and sentenced to 10 years in jail. We cover the life story of Mad Mike Hoare, the menace mercenary, and his escapades in Africa. Thomas Michael Bernard Hoare, also known as Mad Mike Hoare, was born on the 17th of March 1919 in Calcutta, India. His seafaring father was working in India as an assistant dockmaster. After spending his early years in both India and Ireland, Mike Hoare attended schools in England and proceeded to join the British Army in 1939. In the army, he became a small arms expert and rose in the commissioned ranks. During World War II, Mike Hoare served with the British Army in India and Myanmar. By the time he left the army, he had become a major. From here, Mike went back to London, where he became a qualified chartered accountant. But Mike Hoare was a man who desired a life full of thrills and adventure, which is why he emigrated to apartheid-era South Africa in 1948. In South Africa, Mike Hoare ran several businesses, which included organizing safaris for tourists. But soon enough, he got the lucky break that he needed, one that would see him embark on the life of a soldier of fortune in the heart of Africa. While Mike Hoare was running his businesses in South Africa, he met Moise Tshombe, a Congolese businessman and politician. This was in the year 1961. So let me give you a quick background of what was happening in the Congo at the time. This country had just gained independence in 1960, but unfortunately, it soon disintegrated due to various reasons, such as ethnic rivalries and the resource curse that made it an arena for superpower conflict by proxy. At the same time, the first Prime Minister of the Congo, Patrice Lumumba, had just been assassinated. This state of affairs really provided a fertile ground for adventurers such as Mike Hoare. Moise Tshombe sought to establish a breakaway state in the wealthy Katanga province, and he enlisted the services of Mike Hoare to help him with his secessionist revolt in the Katanga province of the DRC. Unfortunately for Moise Tshombe and Mike Hoare, their revolt in Katanga failed. Hoare was even quoted as saying that 2 of his men were cannibalized by enemy forces there in the Congo. But this whole encounter did not mark the end of Tshombe and Hoare's relationship. 3 years later, Moise Tshombe, who was now Prime Minister and largely seen as a staunch American ally and anti-communist crusader, hired Mike Hoare, who himself was a lifelong anti-communist. Moise Tshombe hired Mike Hoare in order to put down the communist-backed Simba rebellion that was fomenting in the Congo. Now is the perfect time to talk about the Simba rebellion that started in 1963. From 1963 to 1964, a minor communist-inspired rebellion against the Congolese central government broke out in the province of Kwilu in the Congo. This rebellion had its origins in historical tribal rivalries. The rebellion in Kwilu was under the leadership of a man by the name Pierre Mulele. Mulele was an early collaborator of Patrice Lumumba and had spent many months in communist China prior to this rebellion. At this moment in time, the central government of the Congo and the United Nations forces were unable to extinguish the rebellion due to a lack of resources. However, by mid-February 1964, the the rebellion was still confined to a relatively small area. But this rebellion in Kwilu only served to inspire other more serious rebellions in the eastern Congo. Here, in the region of Kivu, tribal discontent erupted into open rebellion, and this was in April of 1964. These rebels were also under the leadership of leftist followers of the late Lumumba. These insurgents that were causing the government headaches came to be known as the Simbas, and they allegedly received some direction from the Chinese embassies in Congo-Brazzaville and Burundi. The Simba rebels were also backed by the Soviet government and later joined by Cuban revolutionary Che Guevara. It is also worth noting that the Simba army was composed of Congolese tribesmen who were largely inexperienced and were led to battle by witch doctors. For the Simbas, each recruit was put through an elaborate ceremony which conferred muti or traditional medicine on him, supposedly to make him immune to bullets. The belief was that if the warrior took the precaution of waving palm branches and chanting "Mai Mai" as he went into battle, enemy bullets would simply turn into water. Well, inevitably, some did get killed in battle, but the witch doctors quickly explained that the deceased rebels had probably violated some of their commands. Despite all of this that I've said, the Simbas did gain some ground and were indeed a problem for the central government. So this is the point where Moise Tshombe and our main guy, Mad Mike Hoare, come back into the picture. Moise Tshombe had gone to exile in Spain, but now at the onset of the Simba rebellion, he returned to the Congo, and as soon as he arrived, he announced that he was the only man able to control this situation. Treating the Congo as a Cold War battleground, United States authorities had encouraged Moise Tshombe to hire mercenaries such as those led by Mike Hoare in order to help bolster the effort in fighting the Simba rebels. And as early as June of 1964, a man by the name of Lieutenant Colonel Gary Puren, who was also a former mercenary in the Katanga Air Force, had started recruiting new mercenaries on behalf of Moise Tshombe. Mike Hoare was to be the commander designate of the new mercenary force, and Gary Puren was going to be the commander of air operations. Several young men from the former Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland were among the mercenaries. Rhodesians unemployed, some looking for adventure, were screened for the service in what was going to be called the 5 Commando Unit. This was the unit that was to fly the banner of the Wild Geese while being commanded by Major Mike Hoare. Long queues formed at the recruiting centers in Johannesburg, South Africa, as people were responding to an advertisement in a local newspaper. For the mercenary recruits, their initial contract to be in the Congo was going to be 6 months long, in which earnings for a recruit were $280 plus $420 as a danger supplement, and also 37,000 Congolese francs as pocket money. A $19,000 indemnity would be paid to relatives in the event of death in the Congo. So the squad to fight against the Simba rebels had now been assembled with Mike Hoare as their leader. Several hundred mercenaries were also recruited from France, Germany, Ireland, and elsewhere. Alongside Mike Hoare, these mercenaries became involved in the efforts to push the Simba rebels out of Albertville, leading a nighttime boat attack on the rebels with the aim of capturing the town's airstrip. Early on, Hoare's 5 Commando was plagued by poor logistics and a lack of discipline amongst his soldiers. The lack of equipment and irregularities in pay damaged the unit's morale, and the unit initially sustained a high casualty rate. However, over the course of late 1964, the Congolese government improved the financial and logistical situation while Mike Hoare screened out soldiers he deemed unfit. Nevertheless, by the end of the year 1964, the 5 Commando unit still suffered from disciplinary problems, but they still proved quite effective against the Simbas. Hoare's men swept through the country, mowing down the untrained and outnumbered Simba forces. In total, the mercenary unit was paid about $300,000 a month, and was also backed by an instant air force that was created by the United States CIA. One notable event of their war in the Congo was in November of 1964 when Mike Hoare's men closed in on Stanleyville, which had been a Simba stronghold up until this point. Here in Stanleyville, about 1,600 missionaries, Europeans and Americans had been taken hostage by the Simba. In this operation, Belgian paratroopers rained down on the city and the mercenary force swooped in to provide support. Almost all of the hostages were freed and evacuated by plane. Mike Hoare and his team were applauded for their exploits in this mission. Now, there was also a dark side to how the mercenaries were operating in the Congo. There were accounts of how the 5 commando units committed wartime atrocities. Reports indicated that the mercenaries were guilty of serious excesses that included robbery, rape, murder, and beatings. Some South African members of the unit were later convicted of manslaughter by Congolese courts.
The greatest thrill I get, of course, is the command of men. I'm talking about real men. Not a whole flock of Nancy boys. I mean the real McCoy. And I love being in the presence of hard men, not necessarily ruffians, but men who can live hard and not grumble. I like that type. The fact that they are under my command and that I have, in fact, the power of life or death over them, this moves me in a strange way and makes all the sacrifices worthwhile.
Were the stories of looting by the mercenaries in the Congo exaggerated?
Well, I wasn't in a position to read most of the stories about the looting, but looting there was, there's no question about it.
How about atrocities?
No, extremely few. In fact, never an atrocity in my command knowingly perpetrated, and never an order given to that end.
Well, were there many summary executions? Mercy killings of wounded Simba?
There's quite a lot of that, and...
The 5 Commando became highly efficient in working with the Congolese troops, and they cleared Eastern Congo of the Simba rebels and almost captured Che Guevara in his camp, forcing him to escape to Tanzania. But these victories came at a political cost, mainly to Moise Tshombe. This is because several people despised the fact that Moise Tshombe had hired white mercenaries to assist with fighting the rebels, as opposed to getting help from other African countries. Other quarters even viewed Moise Tshombe as a puppet of Western countries. So on the 13th of October 1965, Congolese President Joseph Kasavubu relieved Prime Minister Moise Tshombe of his duties and replaced him with Evariste Kimba, considering Moise Tshombe as being too ambitious and very unpopular in the country as well as within neighboring African states. Mobutu Sese Seko shortly thereafter removed both President Kasavubu and Prime Minister Evariste Kimba in a coup, appointing himself as president. Once Moise Tshombe had been relieved of his duties, there was uncertainty and insecurity within the 5 Commando unit. So Gary Purin left the Congo alongside Moise Tshombe for exile in Belgium, and Mike Hoare did not renew his contract and left the Congo. When he returned to South Africa, Mike Hoare reportedly told journalists that, and I quote, "Killing communists is like killing vermin. Killing African nationalists is as if one is killing an animal. My men and I have killed between 5,000 to 10,000 Congolese rebels in the 20 months that I've spent in the Congo, but that's not enough. There are 20 million Congolese, you know, and I assume about half of them at one time or another were rebels while I was down there." This brought an end to the Congolese chapter of his career, but the story did not end here. One more notable chapter was to follow for Mike Hoare. After his exploits in the Congo, Mike Hoare took a break from soldiering to embark on a worldwide cruise aboard his 38-foot yacht. He also returned to the accounting profession, and in the year 1978, he gained more fame across the world with the release of the movie The Wild Geese, which was a movie about mercenaries that was loosely modeled after Mike Hoare and his 5 Commando. But in him there was still a void that needed to be filled, and he would take steps to fill this void via an audacious attempt to overthrow an African government. So in 1981, when he was just a young 62 years old, Mike Hoare led more than 40 men in an effort to overthrow the socialist government of the Seychelles, an archipelago Eastern African nation in the Indian Ocean. Hoare's mission was to return to power ex-president James Mancham, a 49-year-old pro-Western leader who had been deposed by Franz Albert René in a 1977 coup. So armed with AK-47 assault rifles concealed in false bottom bags, Hoare and his team posed as rugby players and adopted the name of a drinking club, the Ancient Order of Froth Blowers. To conceal the weapons, they piled toy cars, toy boats, Christmas candy, and badminton sets. Well, their plan to conceal the weapons failed, leading to their operation to also fail. What transpired was that an airport customs inspector from the Seychelles found a weapon hidden in one of the froth blowers' luggage. One gun muzzle poked through the toys, which were marked as gifts for disabled children, and the customs officer spotted this. The official immediately alerted the police, and what ensued was a gunfight at the airport in which one mercenary was killed and several others wounded. In the 20 hours of fighting that followed, 44 mercenaries managed to escape, leaving others as a rearguard. This team of mercenaries was desperate to escape from the Seychelles, and so they fought their way to the airport's control tower, guiding an incoming Air India 707 flight to a landing, and they commandeered the plane. They forced the Air India pilot to fly them across the Indian Ocean to Durban, South Africa. In other words, Mike Hoare and his team hijacked the plane. International suspicions pointed almost immediately to the apartheid South African government as being behind this attack by Hoare and his mercenaries. This is because the apartheid South African government had opposed President René's socialist regime in Seychelles, and they were already active in destabilizing other leftist governments in Southern Africa. These suspicions seemed substantiated by the casual manner in which the South African government dealt with the hijackers. Instead of extraditing them to the Seychelles, where they would be tried for treason, or charging them with hijacking, the South African government opted to unconditionally free 39 of the 44 mercenaries and charge the leaders, including Hoare, with lesser crimes. Following this, there was international outcry because of the lenient manner in which the mercenaries had been dealt with, forcing the South African government to rethink their response to the incident. Several nations warned that South Africa could be removed from air travel routes unless the government enforced international agreements against the harboring of air hijackers. So the South Africans had a change of heart, and they then brought hijacking charges against all of the escaped mercenaries. Following a 5-month trial, 42 of the mercenaries were found guilty of airplane hijacking, and the ringleader, Mad Mike Hoare, was sentenced to 10 years in prison. His colleagues were given about 6 months to 5 years, and the judge later reduced most of the sentences to just 6 months. Suspicions of who was supporting Mike Hoare were also confirmed, as throughout the trial, he insisted that his operation had the blessing of the South African government. Indeed, more than half of the convicted mercenaries had been members of either the South African Defence Force or the Army Reserve. Many years later, in 1998, the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission ruled that the apartheid South African government was indeed responsible for the attack in the Seychelles. For Mad Mike Hoare, the Seychelles trip was his last hurrah as a mercenary. He only served nearly 3 years in jail before relocating to France, where he lived for 20 years before returning to live in South Africa in 2009. Mike Hoare died on the 2nd of February 2020. He was 100 years old. Let me know in the comment section below what your thoughts are about the career of Mike Hoare, the soldier of fortune. Don't forget to like and share the video if you enjoyed it. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been Tatenda for African Biographics. Until next time, cheers. Have a good one.